By the winter of 1877, the gateway to the west had become a fortress under siege. The festive hum of the great bazaar was replaced by the rhythmic thud of distant cannons. Munir, once the surveyor of growth, now surveyed the architecture of defense. He met with Halim near the inner ramparts, where the merchants' silk stores had been repurposed for grain rations. The air was cold and brittle, mirroring the fragile state of the Sanjak. They looked out toward the horizon, where the smoke of the approaching conflict signaled the end of the only world they had ever known. Inside the schools, the atmosphere was one of hushed urgency. Esma continued her lessons even as the windows were reinforced with heavy timber. She sat with Elif, her most devoted student, teaching by the light of a single oil lamp. They were no longer studying the geography of empires, but the poetry of endurance. Esma knew that the literacy she provided would soon be the only baggage her students could carry with them. She spoke of the courage of their ancestors, preparing Elif for a future where her identity would be her only sanctuary. In January 1878, the inevitable arrived. The siege ended not with a roar, but with a somber silence, as the terms of surrender were finalized. Munir stood in the courtyard of the government house with Halim, watching the administrative transition. The Ottoman banners, which had flown over Nisss for centuries, were being lowered for the last time. For Munir, the sight was a physical blow. The registries he had kept were now documents of a territory lost. Halim clutched a set of iron keys to his shop, knowing they would likely never turn in those locks again. The Treaty of Berlin reshaped the map, and the Turkish population of Nisss faced a harrowing choice: remain as subjects of a new administration or depart for the remaining Ottoman lands. At home, Esma worked with her elderly mother, Saliha, to pack their lives into a few modest trunks. They prioritized family heirlooms, a silver coffee set, a hand-woven rug, and Esma's books. Saliha moved with a slow, heavy grace, touching the carved wooden walls of their konak, as if memorizing the feel of the wood before they left it forever. The Gok, the Great Migration, began as a slow trickle that turned into a river of humanity. The roads leading south toward Sofia and Edirne were choked with ox-drawn wagons and weary travelers. Munir coordinated the transport of the official archives, working alongside Kenan, a rugged carter who had been hired to move the heavy crates. Amidst the chaos of the exodus, Munir ensured that the wooden boxes containing the land deeds and census records were covered with thick tarps to protect them from the biting sleet. The crossing of the stone bridge over the Nisava was the final threshold. It was no longer a place of casual greetings, but a bottleneck of displacement. Esma walked beside Elif, who carried a small bundle of her own belongings. They paused at the center of the arch, looking back at the minarets and the red-tiled roofs of the Turkish quarter. The bridge, which had once symbolized the city's transition into modernity, now served as the exit ramp for a culture that was being uprooted from its soil. The journey was a test of survival. As the refugees moved further from Nisss, the winter grew harsher, and the path became a slurry of mud and melting snow. During a brief rest by the roadside, Esma sat with Elif, sharing a piece of dry bread. The girl's boots were worn through, and her spirit was flagging. Esma began to tell a story, not from a book, but from her memory, about a legendary garden that bloomed even in the deepest frost. She realized then that as a teacher, her role had shifted from educator to guardian of hope. Nights on the road were filled with the flickering orange of campfires and the low murmur of shared sorrow. Munir often sat with Kenan the carter, guarding the wagons from bandits and the elements. Kenan spoke of his ancestors who had first come to the Balkans centuries ago, while Munir looked at the crates of records, wondering if they would ever be opened again. They were muhassirs now, migrants defined by what they had left behind. The administrative order Munir had spent his life building had dissolved into the necessity of the next mile. After weeks of travel, the spires of Edirne appeared on the horizon, a sanctuary within the shrinking borders of the empire. In a crowded settlement camp on the outskirts of the city, Munir finally reunited with Esma. They stood together amidst the sea of tents, two souls who had carried the memory of Nisss through the cold. They were exhausted and penniless, but they were alive. Munir still had his ledgers, and Esma still had her stories. They realized that while the city of Nisss was lost to them, the Nissli identity would survive in the people who had escaped. The departure from Nisss was not an end, but a transformation. In the years that followed, the families who fled integrated into the fabric of the new Turkey, bringing with them the flavors, crafts, and intellect of the Balkans. Elif grew up to become a teacher herself, passing on the lessons Esma had taught her under siege. The registers Munir saved became vital historical links for descendants seeking their roots. The story of Ottoman Nisss ended in the valley of the Nisava, but its heart continued to beat in the memories of those who turned their exile into a new beginning.